The Birds podcast is with us now as the Eagles win. You just heard from Nick Sirianni, and obviously he was an embattled head coach last week. Everybody was firing questions about him, his job, and everything, Moshe. But I look at a number that really stands out to me, and it's not Saquon Barkley's rushing. It's not the sacks. It's the Eagles on the road are the second-best team in the NFL since Nick Sirianni has taken over. They are 20-9 on the road. So Nick had a rough week, but man, 28-3, almost one of the most complete performances this team has had in a long time. It feels like people have to give him credit this week.
Mike, I think you give everybody credit this week. Nick Sirianni, Vic Fangio, the players, the preparation, the ability to build off of what was deemed sort of a incomplete win or a hollow win the week before, and to come back and continue to do some things better. One of the big things we talked about on Inside the Birds this past week, and I think we'll be saying it again this week, is even if you don't have a pretty win, even if you're lacking in substance, even if you still have issues that you're working through, what you need to do is not take one step forward, then two steps back. You need to continue to progress. You need to continue to grow. So for the second straight week, the Eagles didn't allow an offensive touchdown. For the second straight week, the Eagles did not turn the ball over, right? So while there are still, and for the second straight week, you looked at tackling and thought there just weren't that many plays, if any, where the Eagles just blew and whiffed on a bad tackle. So for 2 weeks now, you've seen steady improvement in those areas. You've seen some schematic things as well. And that you have to keep doing, getting better, keep growing while you refine your identity, Mike.
I don't know what to make of some of the numbers here. I want to get your take on it. Let's go on defense first, where obviously they had 8 sacks. They had 5 last week, 13 in 2 weeks. Their defense yesterday allowed 181 total yards, 105 passing, 76 rushing. The 8 sacks, 5 in the first half from guys that have not had their name called a whole heck of a lot. Nakobe Dean, Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter got a sack in there. Dean had 2. You talked about schematically. What are the Eagles defensively with Vic Fangio? Is he getting more familiar? Is he getting a better sense of his personnel? What do you make of the defense, as you said, 2 straight weeks of solid play? Is it that, or, hey, man, they played the Browns and the Giants. Relax.
I mean, it's a little bit of everything. I think that fairly, until the Eagles play a team with a little bit more functional of an offense and better offensive line, and we'll see with Cincinnati. We know they have a very good quarterback who's playing better than Deshaun Watson and Daniel Jones, although they do have some injuries up front. But just the fact that it's a better offensive quarterback and offensive system, I think we'll get a better idea of the Eagles' pass rush and where it really is. But I heard Scott Grayson on with you earlier, and I thought he made a really good point. I was thinking the same thing, is that the fact that the sacks have been spread around the last 2 weeks shows you that it's as much schematic as it is guys beating guys one-on-one. So you're seeing Vic Fangio blitz more. You're seeing him do more things up front when he's not blitzing. You're seeing a coach put his players in a position to succeed, which is a coach's job, right? So I think that's a good thing and a needed thing. However, I think at the end of the day, when you want to win those big playoff games and you want to make deep runs and you want to establish yourself, you need the Nick Bosa's of the world, right? You need the Aiden Hutchinsons of the world, unfortunately, and out for the year. But you get my point. You need to have guys who win one-on-one in a 4-man rush, because you can't ask your defensive coordinator to just scheme up a great pass rush week after week against the better teams. Yeah. So I'm not taking anything away. I'm just saying that's what we've seen the last 2 weeks. It feels a little bit more schematic than guys just winning one-on-one, but that's okay. That got you 2 wins. Let's see how you grow from it in this next coming week. I do think Bryce Huff played better, though, and some of the guys did win some matchups. I'm not trying to take anything away from them.
Well, I mean, you talk about schematically, obviously Dean is one. They obviously send him on a couple different blitzes from a couple different areas of the field. That's one that certainly stands out. Why just Cooper DeJean doesn't have a sack or anything. I think having him has allowed them to get more creative in the secondary doing things. You just wonder, again, how much is the opponent playing in or no, man, they got some talent over here, and you change coordinators. It takes a little time to let this thing kind of become what ultimately where they hope to get to.
Yeah, I tell you what, that one of the Nakobe Dean sacks is a really good illustration of both scheme and the player winning one-on-one, because if you recall, he came through the A-gap on I think it was a sim pressure, because I think one of the defensive ends dropped, so he came through the A-gap, and he got cut pretty good by the running back, Tyrone Tracy, but he still got back to his feet and then sacked Daniel Jones afterward, which is a very difficult thing to do when you get cut blocked down to the ground like that. So good on Nakobe, and good on the schematic decision to send him and have somebody else drop, because that confused Daniel Jones, and he did not. That was sort of a coverage and one-on-one sack, because Daniel held onto the ball, and it allowed Nakobe the time to get back on his feet and then complete sack.
In coverage, let's get your thoughts on them in the secondary. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He was brought over because he had 6 interceptions a couple of years ago. You needed a playmaker back there. Blankenship had an interception that was called back. Darius Slay. This isn't a very powerful pass offense. Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson. What did you think of their pass coverage yesterday?
Listen, I think you have to give credit where it's due here, and not go the route of, well, it's the Giants, well, it's Daniel Jones, because I know from our standpoint on Inside the Birds, we made a point to say, hey, the Giants may stink, but you know what? They went to Seattle and scored 29 points without Malik Neighbors, right? And, they gave the Bengals a good game defensively. So there are some things the Giants are doing better this year than they have over the last year or two. You have to give them credit for that. And one of the things that they've done well is when Malik Neighbors is healthy, they have gotten him the ball. Mike, his target share was 36%, which is a staggering number. If you're a wide receiver and you get 18% of the targets in your offense, that's usually a really, really good number, and you're a number one. This guy was getting twice that. And the Eagles basically held him to what was it, 4 catches, 46 yards, if I'm not mistaken. So, nobody else has done that to the Giants offense yet. So I think you have to look at the Eagles, especially given the concerns that they had after a few weeks, and say they tightened some things up there. That is a feather in the cap of improvement for the Eagles.
Yeah, and their run game was non-existent too. And I don't know if that's the Eagles' run defense is now something either, or the Giants. I guess a lot of this is how impressed are we by what they're doing and the level of opponent, because I'll ask you, at 4-2, where does this team feel they are? They're a drop pass from being 5-1, but do we feel that this team is a 4-2, 5-1 feeling team?
You really hit the phrase to get under my skin. Like, I hate that drop pass from 5-1 crap. That's like me saying they're 3 Saints running into each other away from still being 4-2. Like, every game has that kind of stuff. They're fair, and they deserve to be 4-2. I will say that I think the only way you can do it right now is the eye test, and then you start to build your tiers, right, of teams. There's an upper tier of teams in the league, teams that are either undefeated or have 1 loss. You look at the Lions, you look at the Chiefs, you look at I think the Packers look like a better team now. Personally, I know the Eagles won the game. If you want to disagree with me or somebody else does, they can pick that fight and fine. I just think the Packers look like a better team right now and more complete than the Eagles. But, if you're starting to put together that tier 2 of teams that have winning records and have, struggled, but also look pretty good at times, like the Falcons, then they're right there. They're obviously chasing, trying to win the division, which they can, and, get into the playoffs. But, they don't look to me yet like a team that is 4-2 but feels like 5-1 or 6-0.
Well, that's interesting, because you're right. I think if you just said, hey, who looks better, Green Bay or Philadelphia, you would say, well, Green Bay does. Yet Philly beat them, and you go all the way back to that night. The Eagles were at full strength in reality, and they really haven't been since that mark. So is that that Brazil game? Is that the high water mark for them? Is that their ceiling of who they really can be?
No, because I still think that game was a misleading game. I think they missed a lot more tackles in that game against Green Bay and played a lot poorer defense than they did against Atlanta than they did against, New Orleans than they did in the last 2 weeks. I honestly think if they played that game on a neutral field again and it's week 1 and everything is the same as week 1, the Packers probably win by 2 touchdowns, just the way the Eagles played defense that game.
Mm-hmm.
But, they did have A.J. Brown. That obviously makes a big difference. He adds an explosive element to their offense. But they are doing things better since that game, for me not to say that is still their high water mark of the season.
All right, where do you think this team is without Saquon Barkley?
Oh, boy. Well, who are you just saying you take Saquon off and you don't replace him with another?
Well, I mean, like DeAndre. They decided to bring DeAndre Swift back.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Yeah, probably not 4-2. Probably 2 or 3 wins at most.
Okay, so with that, then does that answer kind of back the Eagles into the corner of what their identity should be?
Should they be running the ball with Saquon Barkley?
Of course. Obviously you got Brown and Smith. So, you look at that and it's easy to say, hey, we got these 2 great weapons. We got to utilize them. And I said all last week, the Eagles' problem is they got too many weapons, and that's not a bad thing. But when you have too many weapons, you try to make them all too happy. The star of this team should be their offensive line and the ability to run the ball behind it. And then you can, off of that, grow or pick who you want to be the star that week. And I think they've kind of backed themselves into that's who we are.
It's funny because the Eagles really – this is a really long conversation. But, if Kyle Shanahan or Kevin O'Connell were coaching this team, you would probably get that because those are guys who are not afraid to use the run game predominantly when they need to, even though they, their quarterbacks might be playing well. But that's just what they do philosophically. They'll put 12 personnel. They'll put 21 personnel. They still play with the fullback, right? And they run the ball with Christian McCaffrey, or they'll run the ball in Minnesota with Aaron Jones, even though both of those teams also have the Debos and the Ayuks and the Justin Jeffersons of the world, because that's just the identity of a Shanahan-style offense. But the Eagles have the components to run that, but they don't have the coordinator or the head coach or even the organizational philosophy to be that way. So that's, again, a kind of a broader discussion about organizational philosophy. But, yeah, to your point, I think that they can and should be relying on the run. But I will also say, Mike, that game yesterday was really strange because the Eagles scored 28 points, but they were not necessarily an offensive juggernaut either. No. They really did rely on about 3 really big Saquon Barkley runs and a big A.J. Brown catch to be able to get into the end zone. They got touchdowns from those plays, and that really helped them, as opposed to maybe even stop at the 7 or 8 where now you're in the red zone and they haven't been a great red zone offense this year. So I still think they're finding their identity. And, yeah, they should run the ball, but that's not going to solve everything either, though.
No, but I'll tell you what. You could see, one of the first plays of the game, it might have been the first, they went under center. They used a fullback yesterday. They had an offset eye in the backfield. It feels at least they are, I don't want to say committed, but are committed to finding out if they can expand their running attack.
I agree. And we've talked about that a lot on Inside the Birds and The View, and just the idea of if you're going to run Kellen Moore's offense, it's got to feature, and if you have this offensive line and running game, it's got to feature some downhill, under center, run the ball, run it a few times, and then work play action off of that, because that's a really effective use of all of your weaponry, and the Eagles just weren't doing a lot of it. They started to do it more. We saw this against the Giants. I don't know if that's from conversations that were in-house or if the quarterback finally said, all right, let's do it a little bit more. So, yeah, they better rely on that just keep doing that. And then as your quarterback improves and starts to see the field a little better, then now you've got 2 things working really well for you.
Yeah, well, and, that 4th and 3 play, you're anticipating a run or something short, and it's the second week in a row on 4th and 3. They're able to go down the field or, something like that. They can go and get that one-on-one matchup. So, you talk about, obviously, A.J. Brown could be the star of your team, But, how many teams, we talk about this a lot, Justin Jefferson, not a lot of success team-wise. There's a lot of great receivers that don't have a lot of team success. It's hard to be a pass-first star receiver offense and win. But yesterday, when you had a 4th and 3 and it came down to it, you got the one-on-one coverage because they were so concerned about Barkley.
And I think that whole sequence, Mike, is what makes people not frustrated, but it's really hard to understand the identity of this team because the 4th and 3 is set up by the failed 3rd and 3 where Devontae Smith is running wide open right across the face of Devontae Smith, and he just doesn't – of Jalen Hurts, and he just doesn't pull the trigger. And it's like, how do you not pull the trigger on that play, but then you have the gumption and the ability to just get everybody lined up, 4th and 3, and throw an absolute beautiful dart to A.J. Brown down the sideline. It's almost like you're making it harder on yourself, but you're pretty good at making that hard play look kind of routine. So I don't know. You just throw your hands up in the air and say, this is how you're surviving right now.
Yeah, listen, that's it's funny. It's like it almost feels like every once in a while they're just like a playground team and just kind of like, hey, let's just draw it up in the sand and see if this thing works. I want to get your opinion about Hurts. No turnovers, but is it no turnovers because he's kind of growing, or does he seem tentative at times?
I would have to be in Jalen Hurts' head. I don't think it's that he's tentative. He clearly doesn't pull the trigger sometimes when guys are open, but I don't know if that's reluctance or just comfort or trust. There's a whole lot of questions in there that have really honestly been, for guys like myself and Adam and Greg Cosell who breaks down the tape, it's been kind of puzzling to figure out going back to the end of last year. I think it's a good thing that he's not putting the ball in harm's way, but I don't know that I correlate that to why he's not throwing. Listen, when a guy is wide open right in front of you, there's no harm in throwing him the ball. And it's sort of mind-boggling right now why he's not pulling the trigger on those. And I don't know if that's because in his head he thinks that some kind of a risk could happen there that he wants to be averse to.
Right, exactly. It feels. I'm telling you, there's times, man. I said everything he does looks like it's in slow motion, and it's like, you know what? Do you feel that way sometimes?
Yeah, at times yesterday, especially in the first quarter. He got sacked a lot. Yeah, it did. It feels like. All right, so I had this conversation with Greg, and I'll lay it out to you. I feel like the entire Eagles offense this year, and a little bit going back to last year, Mike, is based on hitting the explosive play against a coverage that you really like to throw against. In other words, we really want them to play cover one man so we can run a mesh concept and hit Devontae or AJ across the middle. We've scored a couple touchdowns on that. Or we really may want you to play cover 3 where we're going to have AJ Brown on the left side there with, even though it might be zone, it's still going to be one-on-one on the left side and we run a go route, we can hit that. It feels like the Eagles are really good when they get the matchup that they're looking for of making that big play strike, but you can't get the matchup you're looking for every single play. And the best offenses are able to take what the defense gives on a play-to-play basis so you can work the ball down the field and score and eat up time of possession, kind of like they did 2 years ago, 2022. But it doesn't feel like that is what the offense is very good at right now.
Yeah, I agree. Like in the first quarter, of course, they don't score again, and that's the storyline, but then it kind of gets washed away by the fact that, but really, this comes from a couple of big runs and one big play. There still doesn't seem that, consistency, chain moving, fluidity in the offense. That's where I take from yesterday saying, okay, it's nice to see them run the ball, only 14 passes. That's kind of what the game called for, but it didn't show a lot of fluidity in the offense, and I think a lot of plays are there that he's seemingly a little gun shy at times.
Yeah, and it's not just like this, on Sunday. It's been all year long.
Yeah. Moshe, you can talk about this. You guys watch the film more so. But any time a play breaks down and he has to go to his left or his right, really, that play's done.
Yeah, and there are times where he's doing that when the protection is there, but he just sort of feels the perception of pressure too. So, again, gotta hope that as you said, run the ball and strike your big plays and work on that other stuff in practice and hope that it starts to rectify itself over the course of the year.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Of course, you can get that on all podcasting platforms. They do a great job. Football at 4, breaking it down. Eagles win 28-3. They'll play the Bengals next week. Should be an interesting challenge. The Bengals scored 17 points against this Giants team. They beat them 17-7, and they'll now face off in a pretty big game for both teams. I mean, the Bengals are 3-4. They need this game to keep pace in a very talented AFC. The Eagles, obviously, if they want to be in play, I don't know, do you look at this team as in play for a number 1 seed? Is that fair?
The Eagles?
Yeah. You look at them on that level.
No. I mean, going into the year they wanted to be, but like I said, I can't put them in the same echelon right now with a team like the Lions, with I guess the NFC really doesn't have a whole lot of amazing
That's
teams.
where it's interesting.
I think the Lions are far ahead.
Yeah, that's where it's interesting, Moshe. Is we were talking about this before. They're 4-2. How does this win kind of correlate? And you're like, are they on this? And then you go through the NFC, and you're like, well, the Niners are so banged up. NFC.
Well, the Vikings are off to a good start, though. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you got that whole NFC North where you got Green Bay, Minnesota, Chicago. Even seems like they're kind of like. I don't know. It is a weird NFC where this 4-2 team, you're kind of in play right now. You're a game out of a 1 seed, and you have a tiebreaker over Green Bay.
That's true. I mean, right now your division rival has 5 wins, so that's a big.
Looks like Daniels is going to miss. Looks like Daniels going to be week to week here.
Right. Wow, I didn't realize Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay all with 5 wins. Green Bay at 5-2. Yeah. So I mean, are they in the mix? Sure. Anytime you're 1 or 2 games behind, you're in the mix. You just have to be playing at the level that those teams are playing at to be able to win it.
You know what? The 2 that might get them is the 2 NFC South losses to, Atlanta and Tampa. Losing to those 2 teams might be a problem down the road.
Yeah, and you know what? Tampa at 4-2. They're not probably too far from thinking they're trying to get a number 1 seed as well. If they can win tonight over the Ravens, they're 5-2, and that would be an impressive win.
How do you feel if you're Chicago at 4-2 in last place?
I think if you're the Bears, you don't care. I think you're like, hey, we're 4-2, Chicago. We haven't been this in a while.
Yeah. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, and, of course, right here on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live. By the way, the Eagles-Jacksonville game, they've got demoted from the Sunday night game. They are now no longer playing on Sunday Night Football against Jacksonville. That will be a 4:05 game against the Jaguars. So Doug Peterson's return, no prime time for that one. That was announced a little while ago. All right, Moshe, we will catch up with you.
Do you think the NFL wasn't exactly sure that Dougie was going to make it to that game?
Well,
the Packers this weekend.
If I was just saying, like, that, if you're NBC and you can open up your game with Peterson returning and the whole Super Bowl and that, or Indianapolis, Minnesota, like, I get it, Minnesota's pretty decent, but what the heck is Indianapolis bringing to the table?
Yeah, I don't know. That was a little bit of a head scratch to me, too. That's what I thought. Maybe they see the Packers-Jaguars game as a swan song there for Dougie over the weekend.
Yeah,
I don't know.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you Wednesday.
Yeah, man. Take care.
All right, Football at 4 is brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365.